am so delighted to be here with Imtaz, Bespoke Tailor, here, and it's a treat for me today because we're here in your studio. This is where it all happens. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about this space.
Well, I moved here about 4 years ago, and I was based in East London, and then I thought Islington, and before that I was in Bond Street, so I sort of moved around quite a lot actually. Started out in Battersea, and then went to Westminster, and so I've had my studio all over London, really.
Right, and I know that for people who don't know you, you're Bespoke Tailor. You've tailored lots of people, from celebrities like Michelle Pfeiffer. Tell us some of the people that you've tailored for.
Well, Michelle Pfeiffer bought one of my suits when I was selling them on the King's Road.
Right, okay.
And that was just, I was newly graduated from London College of Fashion, and I had this studio, and I had a whole group of suits that I designed. Right. And I thought, well, what are they doing in my studio? No one knows who I am, you know, where I am. So I took them to the King's Road, and one of the shops took them and put them in the window, and the dresser came, and it's sort of a princess and all sorts of different types of people. So
that's just incredible, that.
Yeah, so that was in, I think, 91.
Right.
And then one of the suits got picked up by Kim Andreoli, who was a stylist at the Sunday Times.
Right.
So she used it for the Vauxhall Corsa supermodel ad, and for the face and various things.
Right.
And that's how my name started, you know, sort of being alongside Oswald Boateng and Timothy Everest, and it was right from the start. So I had just quite a lucky break at the start.
Wow.
And I'd been tailoring in Yorkshire. I had a business when I was 18.
Right. So that's fascinating. Maybe we should start there. So from 18, you started at 18. So did you always know you had a passion for clothes and passion for fashion, as they say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I was a teenager, I knew I wanted to be a tailor, and then there was a course in Yorkshire, and I did that course, and that made me sort of I did really well, and I won this cup. And
let's see. Let's just see. So show us this cup.
Yeah. And I was in the local paper on Calendar News, which was a TV station for Yorkshire, and Country Life and all of this. That's when I was 18.
Wow.
And so it was just sort of really good that my work got picked up really quickly, and Elsie Tanner from Coronation Street really liked it.
Wow.
For Sherry Blair's dad, you know. So there was a link there. When I met her, I could tell her, you know, your dad sort of.
This must have been surreal, though, from being a young teenager from Yorkshire, and I would imagine that going to fashion, you know, particularly for many of us from non-UK heritage backgrounds. How did the family feel that you're passionate about? Did they want you to do something far more traditional? Were they supportive from the off?
Well, initially they weren't as supportive as they could be, and I had to cry all night before they let me go to college. And, and they said, well, if you get a place, then okay, we'll see, you know, whether you can go onto the course. And I got a place straight away. The person who was teaching said, interviewing me, said, yeah, you've got a place. So. Because you could see the level of work, and I'd been sewing since I was 6.
Wow! So did you just find yourself from the age of 6? Did you find yourself just picking up the needle? I mean, were other people in the family? Was the tailoring?
I didn't know about the history of my family until years later, and my dad had worked in the textile mills, and his dad had worked in the textile mills, and so they had a history of working in those mills and knew about fabric, and I just you know, I started picking up fabric and started making dolls things, and playing around, and but in the needlework class, you know, when I was really young, you know, the needlework teacher would say, oh, you're really good at that, and you know, so I got encouragement for that, and so I would always be.
So you had the feel for that, and I can see in this room, and I can't wait. Can you give us a quick guided tour? And I'm dying to see the fabric, and just tell us a little bit about that. Where should we? Where should we
start with the sewing machine.
Okay, so I love this.
That's a sewing machine I've had since I was a teenager, and that's when I had my first business. So my dad bought me 2 sewing machines, and he had an empty shop next to his shop. And he had a dry cleaning business. So again, he went into clothes, but in a different way.
So that's is it like it's an antique then?
And I started sort of making clothes in this little shop, and I got people coming from America and London and all over, but I knew I wanted to be in London and rather than be in Yorkshire, and because I'd had a sort of a touch of fame and all of that. So I got an interview at the London College of Fashion and got a place, and I went over and I started studying, and I worked in Harrods in personal shopping.
Wow.
So I was sort of serving people like George Michael, Simon Le Bon, and you know.
Wow. How old were you at this point?
I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
So yeah, from 18 to 22, and I left Bradford, and I was 22 or something.
I mean, what's already remarkable for me about your story is I think for lots of artists and for lots of creatives, often we feel as though we want this kind of thing to happen, but often it doesn't. So just hearing your story that somebody's just got a passion for doing what they're doing and going with it, because it sounds as though you were encouraged and running with it, is extremely important, because then things do happen. So did it take, even in those early days, did it take a lot of courage? Because when you found yourself that people were responding to the work that you're doing, then you're finding yourself in London, I would imagine lots of these things could potentially be overwhelming. How were you feeling?
Well, you know, I was really quite shy,
right.
And I didn't really have any role models in sort of fashion or anything. But my dad used to get, you know, The Guardian, and I used to read the fashion pages, and then I was giving a talk at the London College of Fashion, and there was one of my, you know, I can't remember her name, but she was in the audience, one of the journalists. I used to read her articles, and she inspired me. But I just thought, you know, I think at that age you sort of think anything is possible, and you don't. And I sort of assumed, oh, this type of thing happens to everyone. But I had to put myself out there. But the opportunities were there, and it was just at the time where there was a breakaway from Savile Row, and a few, you know, me, Oswald Boateng, and you were doing something new. And so, and the press were, you know, the journalists were quite young as well, and they wanted to you know, listen to the stories of their own generation. And we were just coming through, and we were working on really high profile things. So I was doing stuff, you know, so that was on TV.
Did you? I mean, at that time when you were in among that group of emerging, you know, I'm telling you, did you know them? Did you connect with others, or were you very much focused on what you were doing?
Sort of isolated and focused.
Right.
And I knew I really wanted it to succeed, and I think because I'd sort of moved away from my family and everything, you know, and I was on my own, and I knew I had something to prove.
Right.
So I think, you know, coming from a background of my parents coming from Pakistan, and they had a lot to prove, and so I had that sort of drive to do something, and I didn't know anything else other than you know, sort of doing my work.
What I really love, Imtaz, is just that passion for your work. I was watching just the other day by chance, completely different thing. I was watching a documentary, and it was about the guitarist Jimi Hendrix, and they were saying that he would always have a guitar with him. He'd get up in the morning, he'd get up and he'd walk into the breakfast, he'd have a guitar with him. And I get that feeling for you that it's always about that.
Yeah, well, I used to say it was just like sewing to me was just like breathing. You know,
really,
it was just something that you had to do.
And people say this, you know, things. I say just that's what they're about. Carry on with this wonderful tour, this wonderful space.
So that was the machine, and then this furniture was made by me by my father's friend, and he used to work in Australia, and he bought.
Wow, so it's a huge kind of. Is this kind of a huge desk, isn't it?
So it's just at the right level. So when I'm making the patterns, so for each client I make a bespoke pattern.
Right.
And I make that in on this dot and cross paper.
Right.
And so I draft it using their measurements, using a square. And after I've sort of sketched, you know, I sort of do this sort of type of sketch.
Oh, can I see? Let's see these.
Yeah, it's not a great sketch. It's just like really.
But
so I take a list of the measurements and the choice of fabrics, and I've got all the fabrics here.
Yes. So this is like a box of different types of fabrics in here, in these boxes.
There's all these sort of samples of fabrics, and and I've got Holland and Sherry and Yorkshire Bateman Ogden, so still sort of, and all the silks, the Bennett silks, and James Hare, and so people choose from swatches, so they're quite small swatches.
Wow. So that's all the different, so for people who are really, that's all the different types of fabrics that they might want, because some people might have a very clear idea of what they want. So I'd imagine, I mean, talking about that, when people come to you, some people, I guess, especially some of the more high-profile people, they may be very, very familiar with clothes, with fabrics, and with designs and things that they like, so they may know the kind of fabric, the kind of cut and so on that they want. Are there others who perhaps maybe they're in business or something else, or they're newer, maybe even more shy, and are they needing that guidance from you? Maybe they might know about colours. Does all that come into it?
Well, I mean, some clients want you to design it all for them, and you choose the fabric, you're the expert, and that sort of thing. Or some people have got an idea in mind, so they've been sort of dreaming of this dream outfit for years, and they want you to come up with it, and can you find the right fabric? Or it's a specific occasion, so for a wedding, and so you're working on, say, like this bridal dress. It was all beaded, and the fabric got sent away to India.
It's gorgeous, that beading at the top, isn't it? That wonderful.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that's incredibly complex. I mean, my camera,
so I had to. A lot of that, say on the bodice, was all hand sewn, so you couldn't actually sew it by machine.
Wow.
Then if I do a collection, that was a fashion and textile museum.
Yes, this is your show, is it?
It's a show of my work, so menswear and women's wear.
Wow.
And so that was specifically made for that show.
Right. Right. Over here, so we carry on. I have family, and I know family's important to you, isn't it?
Yes. So I've got, I think important to most people, but I've got my daughter who's now 8, and she really likes coming into the studio and playing around with the fabric.
Right. Wow.
And she starts repairing her clothes and doing stuff, or making skirts and things.
Fantastic. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, what I'm tempted to, I'm going to pause here and come back for part 2 and maybe see the rest of the space, and maybe just ask you a little bit about the work now. I know, as well as the tailoring, there's also the work that you do helping a next generation of people who are passionate about coming to fashion, which I love. So I'm going to pause the camera there.